We're really keen on focusing our presentations on helping people toward their sales goals, and that is going to be the focus of this evening's event if you're here in Africa or in your morning over there in the United States. So we just want to go ahead and once more remind you that we do have staff all over Africa. We've got a really rich coverage of really qualified staff who many are agribusiness specialists. The two ladies that are on the call are PhD candidates, and we are really excited about the continuation and assistance for WUSATA companies as they're coming into this market. So it's really a non-traditional market for the Western United States, but for Eastern United States, it is a market that a lot of the states on that side, a lot of the companies over there have been involved with for a couple hundred years already. So for you, it might be new territory, but new territory can be good territory. So let's look into some of the market. This is a slide that I showed in my last presentation, and I like showing it because it really indicates where Africa is headed relative to everything else. And you can see that if we're looking at the demographic expansion of Africa, we're seeing that Africa presently is about 18% of the total world population, but by the end of this century, it could be over 40% of the world's population. We're seeing the continents of Europe and China shrinking, relatively speaking. The USA is not shrinking relative to the rest of the world. And so that's important. But Africa really is the key demographic story that is happening in the world right now. And that's important because when you're working with agriculture, when you're working with food and beverages, the more mouths that you have to feed, that's where the markets are. And where people can afford to buy your products, that's where the markets are. So let's start introducing you to some of the key aspects of the Southern Africa region. The first thing is that there is a customs union down in the southern part of Africa called the Southern Africa Customs Union. It is the oldest customs union in the world, formed in 1910 when we had South Africa join with what were then the British protectorates of Botswana, Lesotho, and Swaziland, now Eswatini. And back in those days, they had different names. And Namibia used to be Southwest Africa, and it became independent in 1990. But these five countries form the core of the Southern Africa Customs Union. They function as one market, really. And so when we do company projects for companies like yours, we often look at the entirety of the South African Customs Union, and we look at the potential. And interestingly enough, other regional countries, Mozambique and Mauritius, have agreements that make them as much as part of the Southern Africa Customs Union as the other countries, but they have side agreements in a way. So it is an important group of 7 countries, really, although 5 of them are formally the SACU countries that make up this region. And then we've got the Southern Africa Development Community, which has formed into a common market in a way. And there are some countries that are a little bit slower in the protocols, but this is really the key organization that brings the whole grouping together. And this is the grouping of countries that we're talking about when we talk about Southern Africa. And so we throw in the Indian Ocean islands of Mauritius and Reunion, which is a French dependency. There's 1 million people that live on the island of Reunion, and they've got French citizenship, and it's treated as a region of France just south of Mauritius there. And that's also part of our region. It's kind of like France's Hawaii. If you ever travel down to those islands, you'll fly in, and it is a place where There's very few beaches. It's very volcanic, and you come in, and the altitude at the tops of the region are about 3,000 meters high. So about 2 miles high. So the island looks incredible. But anyway, some of these islands, they're all part of the region that we work in, and we've got South Africa really is the linchpin economic center of the region, but these countries are growing so fast and becoming really more independent in their economic ways, and so there's a lot of interest in the divergencies that we can discuss with you. And so I just want to point out that the SACU group, SADC group are two important things that we've got to look at when we're discussing Southern Africa. And these are fast-growing markets. So just moving right ahead here, we've got just some of the global statistics on who's who, and you can see that South Africa and Seychelles and Mauritius typically are some of the wealthier in the region. And don't forget countries like Botswana and Namibia, because it's often not the total size of the population and the average of the income, but where you can go to some smaller countries, they'll have a higher average income than some of the bigger countries. And so a country like Botswana or Mauritius might be good ones if you're focusing on selling to the food service sector, where hospitality and the tourism sector are really important. So just be aware that we've got a big population, almost 400 million people, an economy of $1 trillion GDP, and a lot of potential for new growth. And in the food market, particularly, and I'll show you in this presentation, it's one of the fastest growing sectors that we have in the region for a variety of reasons. And then, as a bit of context, the African Continental Free Trade Area is forming into one common market, very similar to the European Union. And we have the SADC group, and we've got the COMESA group, and we've got ECOWAS, and all these other acronyms that make up a lot of the different regional blocks across Africa, but they're all forming into one common market, which is really important for you to understand, because as the different protocols start coming together, as you understand one market and getting into one market with all your phytosanitary requirements, with your labeling requirements, with all of those things, you're going to find that in the next 10 or 20 years, you'll have a very comprehensive understanding of how to get into all or most of the African countries. So this is really an important development. So I don't want to tell you that SADC will be in existence in the same way in 20 years, but this common market is really important. It has right now 1.45 billion people, bigger than China, bigger than India, and it is it's the largest common market in terms of numbers of countries, population, and geographic size. So there's a lot of opportunities right across Africa in all of these different countries, and every country right now is very different, or some of them are very similar, but a little bit different. And in Southern Africa, we find that we have a lot of similarities in the different countries. Now, if you look at where South Africa is in terms of the large concentration of large companies, you see that almost half of the billion-dollar companies that are in Africa are located in South Africa. And these are companies that are owned by Africans. So it's not the foreign companies that have come in and are investing. So there's quite a lot of companies, and now it's gone over 360, I believe, but about 40% of them are located in South Africa. So you can see that there's a concentration of big companies. And in terms of the numbers of companies that deal with food, that same trend exists. Now, another thing that we see is that there's a lot of corridor concepts, a lot of new road and rail building that's been going on. So the region is becoming increasingly linked, and this is being drawn through by a lot of the resources that are going into major markets. Botswana has 23% of the world's coal reserves, and so that country is starting to take off, and they need railways, and so those railways are going into Botswana right now. We have Namibia, which has vast hydrocarbon or petroleum finds just off the shore of the city of Lüderitz, and there's going to be big changes in Namibia very soon. And so we have a lot of big changes that are happening, and often these resource corridors or these transport corridors are tied in with where the resources are and where people can get them to market. So we're seeing a lot of that. And then if we're looking at the general growth of the region, we can see that Southern Africa, comparatively to other regions of Africa, is growing a little bit slower, but still healthy growth. And so, and this is because these other countries typically are catching up, and there's a lot of distance to gain when you can have a well-educated workforce, such as in Kenya or Zambia, and then those people are starting to earn better wages, and they're coming off of a lower base. So this is typically what's happening. So we see that Southern Africa has been static, relatively speaking, to the other regions, and East Africa actually is the fastest growing region in the world for economic growth. If you look at the top countries in GDP, about 6 of the top 10 are African countries. So we have a very strong potential for growth. And you can see that, over the last years, and we can see the dip in COVID, and we can see how different sectors have contributed to the economic growth here and what's happening. So the growth in services is very interesting. We can see that agriculture has continued to grow and to be very strong. And where you've got strong agriculture, you have things like food ingredients that are needing to be imported to augment what's being grown. We have fast-growing food processing, so that's all tied in with that. You can see that the growth in industry is a relatively healthy component of things. But again, services, very interesting, because the tourism and the hospitality sector are right now some of the fastest growing sectors in Africa. And we are doing very well with those sectors. And right now, you might think of South Africa as the place where the gold and the diamonds are mined. That's true. It's also a place where there's a lot of manufacturing, but foreign exchange for the tourism sector is the #1 exchange earner in the country, which is quite interesting. And then we look at the increase in foreign direct investment, and we're likely to see this happening, an increase of companies coming in who invest into South Africa, because we've just had a very positive political change, which is interesting. And I'll get to that in the latter part of the presentation here. So I'd just like right now to have a sidebar and introduce the two of our staff ladies who are on the call. Sikinyiso, maybe if you could just introduce yourself and provide a bit of detail on your background. I'm not going to stop sharing, but maybe if you can just give a voiceover and provide a bit of background on who you are, where you're from, what you're studying, and how long you've been with the company, and those sorts of things.
Okay, thank you so much, Richard. Good day to you, everyone. My name is Kanyiso Maka. I am an agribusiness trade advisor. I've been with ZECOM for over 5 years now. My background is in agricultural economics and also in agribusiness. and agricultural economics is my area of specialization. As Richard mentioned, I'm an agricultural economist, and studying commodities, value-added commodities, as well as different inputs, which also makes part of my work at ZECOM, is something that I've grown so much interest in over the years. So I think that's it for now. I don't know, Richard, would you want me to say anything more?
Why don't you tell them where you're from? What country are you
Oh,
from? And
yes, I am from Zimbabwe, and I'm based in the ZECOM office in Pretoria, South Africa.
right. Okay, thank you, Sikanyiso. And Yetunde, maybe if you could provide some details about yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yetunde. I'm originally from Nigeria, but I'm based here in Pretoria, South Africa. I've been working with ZECOM now for going to 4 years now. Also an agricultural economist by profession. I'm schooling here in Pretoria, studying agricultural economics, majoring in agribusiness. And yeah, yeah, that's it.
Okay, so these two young professionals are soon going to be doctors, as I understand it, and we're going to be looking forward to their graduation ceremony, and it's hopefully not going to be a long way off. So thank you to both of you. And just getting on to the region, we're seeing that overall in sub-Saharan Africa, there is a big growth in imports in general from everywhere. And you can see this from 10 years ago to 10 years in the future, that there is a big potential growth. This is based on the demographic boom that is happening across Africa, but it's also because of the increased buying power that we see. And so some of the largest imports that we've seen in different areas across the region, we're seeing good figures in meat and beverages from the United States, some processed foods, some very specialized fruits and nuts, particularly ones that don't grow here well or where the United States has a competitive advantage, and some particular oil seeds. But where things are very differentiated, that's where we find a lot of potential benefit. The United States exports a lot of food ingredients to Southern Africa. Southern Africa has a very substantial processed food industry, and it does buy a lot of additives and things that go into that. There's a lot of agriculture here, and Southern Africa is a net food exporter, South Africa particularly. And so we see that where things can go to augment this agricultural growth to food processing industry, there's a lot of potential. There's also a lot in the animal feed sector where we see that the United States has a lot of potential with protein feeds. And so there is a lot of different areas where American companies can be successful. And where can these companies be successful? Well, if you look at South Africa, it has and Southern Africa as a whole, there's a lot of grocery retailers. This is a market just like the United States where everybody goes shopping and they don't shop in informal markets. South Africa, typically, almost all the groceries are sold through formal grocery stores. And so we have over 10,000 stores, but these stores are mostly inside some of the larger shopping groups. And so I've listed these in the presentation, and this presentation, of course, is available to you. Just send a message over to Kate or to Kelsey, and they'll be able to forward it at your request. So we have a lot of very sophisticated buying habits here, and these are being supported by a good number of companies. Number 4 you'll see is Massmart Holdings. That's owned by Walmart. And so that is our big American contribution. But the rest of them are owned by um, are um, are owned by South African interests. And then we also look at the food service sector, a lot of fast growth going on there. And you can see that from present to what's expected in about 5 years, we're possibly going to almost double the size of this market in terms of the food service. So there's a lot happening in terms of the quick serve restaurants, particularly in this market. So as you can see that as people become more affluent in their purchases, with their disposable income, they're going to have more opportunity to put that into fast food or to restaurants. And while we're seeing a good, strong growth in the restaurant sector, the fast food sector is doing extraordinarily well. And what is interesting is that South Africa hasn't been tidal waved by a lot of the big foreign or American groups that have come in with their franchises. There's a lot of strong franchises that make up the bigger share of the market here. They understand their market. They know what their buying habits of the local people are, and they're very successful. So that's a bit about that market, tied in very closely to the hospitality sector, but an interesting thing. We see that food inflation has hit us very hard, and you can see that the cost of food has been driven up if you look at the gray chart there. But what has also happened during this period is because of the responsiveness of the agricultural sector, we've seen that sector grow very quickly. And so it hasn't been simply an imported cost of food problem, but it's been one where the growth in the country is being alleviated by a very strong response from the agricultural sector to produce more as the food prices have gone up, and to supply into these markets. But we do have to be wary of price sensitivity if you're coming in as an exporter from the United States, and just be aware of that trend. So, and interestingly enough, if we look at where agriculture is happening, and we just had some friends from Namibia visiting, and they were telling us about the drought there. We do have areas of the region where rainfall is very sparse, and other regions like Cape Town or Durban or parts of Zambia, Mozambique, where rainfall is becoming more predominant. Now, this could be climate change, or it might just simply be the weather, but some places that are in that red zone where there's relatively low rainfall, like Botswana, are getting a lot of rain right now, and Namibia is very dry. So there are some things that have been happening over the last couple of years. Cape Town has been just getting rain after rain after rain, which is interesting because a few years ago it was in drought. And you might remember Cape Town made world headlines as there was a huge drought there. But keep in mind that Africa has 60% of the world's available arable land. And so what we see on this map, this part of Africa, this is likely the most developed, and where we're going to see some of the fastest response to global demands for food, and not least from the African regions that are requiring it through the growth in the middle class and the growth in the population. So interesting. And here's another map that just discusses the growth in the agricultural sector, and where some of the climate models are looking at a decrease or an increase of rain. And you can see that parts of the region are actually going to be getting more rain and are going to be more abundant in food production. And this is good for American exporters, because where there's food production, there's going to be more food processing. Where there's more food processing, there's more ability to add into that sector. Where people are getting wealthier, their tastes become more affluent. They are looking to discover things, and they'll want to import more foreign tastes. And so So with a big population down here in Southern Africa of over 400 million, you're looking at a very good pace. And interestingly enough, what this map also shows is that there's parts of the Sahara that are greening. The higher amount of carbon in the air and the increase in rainfall is increasing the potential for the former or the Sahel areas, which are borderline in the Sahara, to become more productive agriculturally. And so, as long as the herd animals don't eat everything, there's a lot going on. And that's not really in our region. That's West Africa, but we'll get to that during the West Africa presentation. So there's also some very large listed food companies, and I thought I'd list these for you as well. And some of you will be interacting with these, as well as some of the larger retailers, as you come and explore the market. And you'll see that some of these are not small. These are all not small companies. These are all big ones that we've had interaction with our various American friends as they've been coming into the market. And not all of the large companies are listed. So it was easy to find the listed values of the large companies that are on stock exchanges, but not all of them are listed, and some of them are purposefully happy that they're not listed. So they don't have to worry about stockholders, and they have a very long-term look, and they can take on projects that might not be as interesting for people with a 3 or 5 year outlook. They can have a 20 or 30-year outlook, and so there's companies that do match that kind of a profile in the market. So we do have a very good set of market companies in this region. Now, let me tell you about the elections that just happened in South Africa. We had a ruling party, the African National Congress, which was in power with a majority government for 30 years. So effectively, they could run everything the way they saw fit, and they controlled 8 of the 9 provinces, just like you have state governments which are a little bit more independent than a province in South Africa, but still we have the Western Cape, which was controlled by the Democratic Alliance, and all the other provinces in South Africa were controlled by the African National Congress. But in the recent elections, we had KwaZulu-Natal go to a minority-led government led by the Inkatha Freedom Party, and the ANC was the second, actually the third party in terms of electoral size. We had Gauteng, where there is a coalition of parties there in charge now. Northern Cape and Western Cape went wholly Democratic Alliance. So we have a real political mishmash now of who's running which province. And the provinces are important because those are the provinces are where typically the federal or the national government, as we call it in South Africa, provides the funding, and the funding is for a lot of programs like health and education and other things is funded through the provincial instruments of funding. So who runs the provinces is almost as important as who runs the national government. And what happened was we had the African National Congress went from having a majority in parliament to having only 40% of the seats. And we have a completely proportional vote here. And the Democratic Alliance came in with just over 20%. There were some other parties, the Economic Freedom Party, which everybody thought was going to do very well, ended up coming up short. But we had a new party called Umkhonto weSizwe, and they pulled a lot of strength out of the ANC and formed their own party. And we have a former president, Jacob Zuma, who got about 14.5% of the total vote. Now, interestingly, what happened out of all of this was the ANC was forced to form a coalition with some of the more centrist parties, which are typically better at management. So if you live in South Africa and you go through the Western Cape, you can understand that the province that is managed by the Democratic Alliance is very, very well run. And even people who vote ANC are will admit that. And but people vote ANC because they were the party of the successful changeover, and so this has lasted historically. But now the history is waning. After 30 years, you have to be a 40-year-old to have remembered what happened when South Africa became democratic. And so South Africa is in for a period of what will likely be more responsible and more responsive government, less corrupt. And we're already seeing some changes with the new cabinet ministers that have come in, and some of the internal issues that the ANC is having to face with that. Now, all that to be said, South Africa as a country is going to start growing better than it was previously, because it was really entangled in a lot of corruption, particularly with the former president Jacob Zuma. And fortunately, he split off from the ANC, and so the country, as in the long run, looks better situated for faster growth. There's more interest in foreign direct investment coming in from other companies, not just investing in the stock market, but also bringing companies in that are going to be building employment here and that kind of thing. So if you're looking at the future, often statistics aren't going to tell you these things because things are a bit too recent. But the projections are that South Africa will do much better as we have better political management, and we'll be looking at hopefully bringing the crime rate down and building up different sectors. And interestingly enough, the Ministry of Agriculture is headed up by a Democratic Alliance person. So that's going to be very tied into the food sector, which is also already a very strong sector here in South Africa. So I thought I'd mention that from an outsider's perspective, because as you know, I'm a Canadian. I'm not a South African. I don't vote in these things, and I'm just calling it like I see it. But I think that what I'm describing is what the mainstream or the core of the African electorate here, the South African electorate, will be thinking, and what the business community is thinking here too. So I'm going to just quickly go through some of these different countries that we are working with in the region. Angola is a petroleum powerhouse. If you don't know about Angola, you're probably putting Angola into your car's gas tank, because the United States actually imports more petroleum from Africa than it does the Middle East. And there's a lot that is coming from Angola. And if you know anything about this country, it has a population of about 35 million, but the really strong part of its economy is based on the offshore oil sector. What is really interesting about Angola is the growth in the formal grocery sector. There's a lot of very strong companies there that are Angolan owned. There's a lot of foreign companies that have come in, like South African ShopRite Checkers, which is South Africa's largest group. But most of the grocery chains are owned by Angolans, and this has all come in the last 10 years or so in terms of a lot of growth and strength. And so Angola is an interesting country. Yes, they do speak Portuguese there on the whole, but the business people speak English because they have to. And it doesn't have a lot of really good logistical connections to South Africa. And so when you're looking at Southern Africa, you have to kind of set aside Angola and say, okay, this is a separate market. There are a lot of South African products that come in, but American European, your Asian things can be coming in through the big ports there, and they'll be able to be competitive against the South African companies. There are a lot of good food processing companies that are just starting up in Angola. So it is a country to watch and an interesting place. Botswana, a relatively wealthy country, one of the lowest crime rates in the world, interestingly enough. Everybody there speaks English. It is a country with a fast growth rate. On average, over the last 50 years, it is the world's fastest growing economy. And so it went from being one of the poorest economies in the world when they became independent from Britain in the 1960s to a middle class economy with a lot of good companies in the country that have an independent mind. They do import from South Africa, but they're keen on finding buyers or vendors from other places and looking at filling their sophisticated grocery stores with products from around the world. I must also say that Botswana has a very large tourism industry. A lot of people go there from all over the world to look at things. Then we have the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It's a country that has lived with decades of chaos, but seems to be sorting itself out a little bit better now. There's a big population of what could be over 110 million people now, and there's a lot of key potential in the capital city of Kinshasa, some in Lubumbashi in the southern part of the country. So we have a big country there that is on the lower end, and if you're more into selling into markets that are low income, then this could be one. But never think of a low income country with a high population as one you should ignore, because even if you have 3 or 4% of the people that are very wealthy, that's bigger than the whole country of New Zealand. And so, you know, when you're looking at a big country that might have an average income of a low amount, like here we see $1,100, you've got to be aware that there's still a lot of millionaires in this country, and they do shopping, and there are grocery stores, and there are buyers who are interested in the kinds of products that you might have. So we always have to be careful about how we look at statistics and how we parse the markets and how we look at that. And that's what our team is all about, really. Malawi, lovely little country with a smaller population of only 20 million, one that we have some staff that are from and situated there. And then we have Mauritius, a country with over 100 4- and 5-star hotels, one of the most popular tourist destinations in the world. They get a lot of visitors from Europe and India to come in and enjoy the place. It has old volcanoes on it, beautiful beaches, and they speak French and English there. So a lot of potential for food service companies, and a lot of interest there. Mozambique, another country that is growing very quickly with resource bases in petroleum and agriculture. So it's one of the fastest growing markets in the world, 7 or 8%. So there's a lot of potential there for companies that are coming in with certain products that are meant really for a lower GDP per capita, but also this market is closely tied to South Africa. Namibia, extremely strong tourism growth, relatively low population, but a very sophisticated market in terms of its buying habits, tied in very closely to South Africa, but they are very interested in working with American buyers. And the United States is very keen on working more and more with Namibia, as Angola. Botswana is already a very close friend. Zambia is a very close friend. South Africa is becoming a closer friend to the United States with its change in government. So American products are well received in these markets. South Africa, maybe Yaoundé. you're from Nigeria. Tell me about just your some of your ideas on change on living in the two different countries, and how would you describe South Africa as a Nigerian?
Hi, everyone. So, the two markets are a bit different, even though they have some similarities. South Africa has a lot of growing retail service. They also have a growing agricultural processing sector. And on the other hand, Nigeria has a large population, which is the key thing that makes Nigeria the greatest country in Africa. So the population in Nigeria is growing, the young population. There is a lot of interest in foreign products because we have a lot of problems with standard issues. And the fact that we have internet, everyone has access to what products are on the market in all around Africa, even outside Africa internationally. People are interested in getting products out, exchanging tastes and cultures all over. And we also have a large population of immigrating young people. And that has sort of integrated a lot of what the cultural taste is. And the taste is changing. People are open to tasting foods from all over the country, all over Africa, internationally. There's also a growing interracial marriages and relationships, and people are getting aware of products that are not Nigerian or African. And in South Africa, on the other hand, there is a growing population, a young population, and there is also the specific thing that makes South Africa really special is the fact that it's a rainbow country. It contains almost any culture you would find in South Africa, and that makes the taste of consumers very, very delicate and very, very diverse. Yeah. So yeah.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Yetunde. Really appreciate that, those observations. Tanzania, very important market, and it's growing very quickly based off of tourism and the mining sector. So we have a lot of potential there. If you're looking at things, if you want to go to one of the most beautiful places in the world, aim for Zanzibar, and you can get there on an hour and a half ferry from Dar es Salaam, which is the largest city in the country. And then we have Zambia. It's a country that is growing very quickly because a lot of the minerals that go into your electronics are mined there. There's a lot of copper, a lot of cobalt. Um, they do a lot of agriculture there as well. So the Zambian economy is doing much better. If you want to see Victoria Falls, you can go into Zambia and see it from the Zambian side or the Zimbabwe side. And I'm going to have Sikinyiso add a few comments about Zimbabwe next. But Zambia is one country where we're seeing really good growth in interest from the United States, and it is a country where there is a growing, a very fast changeover that's happened going from informal to formal grocery store purchases. And so we know that the middle class there is getting stronger. And so we have our Zimbabwean on staff, Sikinyiso. Maybe tell us some of the differences between Zimbabwe and South Africa, because these countries border each other, but yet they're quite different. So maybe you have a comment or two about that.
Thank you so much, Richard. So I think the major differences between Zimbabwe and South Africa in terms of retail is there are a lot of retail chains in South Africa than in Zimbabwe. Retail, there's a lot of informal retail in Zimbabwe, and that is the main contributing factor is financial unfavorable economic situations. And funny enough, because of unfavorable economic situations, you find that most Zimbabweans find buying food products in South Africa relatively cheaper than the locally sourced ones in Zimbabwe. So that means that there is an influence of South African consumption behavior in Zimbabwe, and the number of they're more than the last time I checked, there were about 4 million Zimbabweans who are living in South Africa, and most of these families, they do send food products or groceries down to Zimbabwe, and these international brands, South African brands, and that is just to cope with the financial pressures. So Zimbabwe, along with other African countries, in most African countries apart from South Africa, there's also been a rise of they are called food markets or informal retail markets, whereby almost every commodity is found. Most brands are found, be it international or local, they are found. And that is creating a market for both for South African products, and also re-exports by South Africa into Zimbabwe. So that's what I can say in Zimbabwe. There's a lot of South African influence as well in Zimbabwe, and in the choice of the food and products they do consume in Zimbabwe. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Richard.
Thank you, Sikanyiso. And so thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing, and maybe we can